Have you ever wondered why some texts were carefully included in the Bible while others were simply thrown aside, as if they never existed? Among these forgotten, there is a book that raises more questions than answers: the Book of Enoch. Imagine a text so powerful, so uncomfortable, that it had to be left out of the official narrative to avoid causing problems. A knowledge that was hidden, persecuted, censored, because, let's be honest, it was perhaps too dangerous for certain religious authorities of the time, those who preferred to maintain absolute control. But the question remains, why was he left out? Did Enoch reveal secrets about the apocalypse, fallen angels and giants that institutions feared the people would know? Secrets about angels who defied divine order, fell in love with mortals, and spawned the fearsome giants, the Nephilim? Something that could challenge carefully established doctrines and change our understanding of the divine once and for all. Today we dive into the reasons behind the exclusion of this fascinating book, confront the conspiracies surrounding its disappearance, and explore the mysteries it still holds. Get ready to question what you have been taught and subscribe to the channel, as there will be no shortage of the most varied controversies that will make you rethink everything you have learned so far. The Book of Enoch presents a narrative that profoundly challenges the doctrines established by traditional churches, especially with the inclusion of the so-called Watchers. These fallen angels, those who dared to break the heavenly rules, not only descended to earth, but became physically involved with humans, generating hybrid offspring, the Nephilim. Imagine this being presented to a church that was trying to establish a picture of a world ordered and controlled by God. How do we fit these creatures, half angelic and half human, into the narrative of a perfect divine creation? The existence of the Nephilim was like a thorn in the side of Christian theology, something that, if not overlooked, could threaten the entire idea of an infallible divine plan. The story of the Watchers also suggests a vulnerability among angels, those beings we imagine as pure and obedient. By physically interacting with humans, they not only defied the orders of the Almighty, but also showed that even the inhabitants of heaven had their own wills and weaknesses. Now, think about this for a moment. If angels themselves can fail and rebel, what does that say about the state of the cosmos? It's an uncomfortable idea, one that resonates with a theology that has always preferred to imagine a perfect and unquestionable celestial hierarchy. Christian theology, for its part, seems to have found a simple solution: avoid the subject altogether. After all, why complicate the narrative when you can simply sweep it all under the story rug? There is also an interesting question about the adaptation of church teachings in relation to hybrid beings. For centuries, religious leaders preferred to focus on more palatable themes and aligned with the morality they wanted to establish. The ideas of fallen angels and Nephilim did not fit into this plan, and the Book of Enoch presented these beings not as demons in the simplistic sense, but as tragic figures, angels who loved too much, who took too many risks. A type of forbidden love that, let's face it, doesn't fit at all with the organized and rigid image expected of celestial beings. It is interesting to note how the church, on many occasions, chose the easiest path. If something does not fit into the narrative, it is excluded, and that's the end of it. We cannot forget that there are echoes of these stories in parts of the New Testament, but in a way, everything is subtly mentioned, as if it were a secret shared only among those who know how to read between the lines. The Epistle of Jude, for example, makes direct reference to angels who did not keep their original state. And here's the question: if these writings were known to the apostles and even influenced their teachings, why was the Book of Enoch not included in the canon? There seems to be a fine line between accepting the concepts and rejecting their sources. Perhaps the church chose to incorporate small excerpts that fit its narrative, while keeping the rest in a zone of forbidden knowledge, a knowledge censored and conveniently ignored. All of this leaves us with a provocative question. Did, at some point, the religious authorities really believe that they could hide something so fascinating and so full of mysteries from the people? The Book of Enoch was not just deleted. He was persecuted, treated as taboo, and paradoxically, this exclusion only added to its allure. The stories of the Watchers and the Nephilim remained alive in the popular imagination, spanning generations as if they were a flame that could not be extinguished. Perhaps the real conflict is not between the Book of Enoch and biblical doctrines, but between the human need to seek answers and the desire of institutions to maintain control. And speaking of control, let's explore how conspiracy theories involve this book in even deeper and more mysterious plots. There is something almost mesmerizing about noticing how echoes of the Book of Enoch resonate in passages of the New Testament. If Judas himself, one of the apostles, found it relevant to quote Enoch in his epistle, then why did this book end up being swept under the rug? The Epistle of Jude directly mentions the angels who kept not their original estate, but forsook their own abode, a direct reference to the Watchers described by Enoch. But then, why was the book that contained the entire story of these angels excluded from the canon? Was it because admitting Enoch's influence might challenge the theological coherence that church leaders were desperate to establish? Furthermore, the Apostle Peter, in his second letter, makes a very similar reference about the angels who sinned and were thrown into Tartarus. Coincidence? Maybe not. There appears to have been something of an informal consensus about the relevance of the Book of Enoch among early Christians. However, as Christianity consolidated itself, something changed. The church was becoming a powerful institution, and power always needs order. Anything that suggested a less linear view of creation and the role of celestial beings could be seen as a danger, a breaking point that could destabilize the structure they were trying to build. Enoch then became the forbidden book, hidden knowledge that no one should have access to and consequently persecuted and erased from history. There are those who say that the apostles cited Enoch as a kind of code between them, something that was there, between the lines, for those who knew how to recognize it. After all, isn't it fascinating to think that, even though it was not present in the canon, the Book of Enoch was still important enough to be brought up in context, spoke of judgment and the fall of angels? It appears that the book was deleted, but its influence never completely disappeared. He continued there, in whispers, whispering in the canonical pages, a kind of shadow that the church could not completely erase. Like that family secret that everyone pretends doesn't exist, but that appears in every gesture, every evasive look. Perhaps the problem is that the Book of Enoch offered a view of the cosmos that was too uncomfortable. He spoke of a heaven where angels could fall, where power was not absolute, where forbidden knowledge was sought and shared. This was an invitation to curiosity, to questioning. And of course, there is nothing more dangerous for those who want to maintain control than a curious people. Imagine a book that encouraged people to see angels as tragic, fallible figures who made mistakes and paid for them. It is not the image of a perfect celestial hierarchy, and that made a liability to the narrative of an all-powerful God and infallible order. The Book of Enoch was a constant reminder that even heaven had its imperfections, something that, let's face it, was not interesting for the power project of the nascent church. Finally, there is the issue of theological coherence. Perhaps the church decided that in order to build solid doctrine, some parts of the puzzle needed to be left out. The problem is that, in doing so, they ended up creating a gap, a void that curious people and conspiracists love to exploit. After all, how can we accept that the apostles were inspired by a text that was later considered inappropriate? It seems there was something more at play, something that involved trying to shape not just faith, but also the way people understood the universe. The Book of Enoch was not just deleted. It was kept on the sidelines, as a reminder of what could not be said. And that's precisely when conspiracy theories begin to gain strength, bringing with them stories of hidden truths, heavenly secrets, and the fear that, perhaps, people could discover more than they should. Few topics are as compelling and charged with mystery as religious conspiracy theories, and the Book of Enoch appears to be at the center of many of them. The idea that the book was deliberately excluded to hide uncomfortable truths piques our curiosity. Imagine fallen angels, known as the Watchers, descending to Earth and becoming directly involved in human history. This sounds like a cosmic conspiracy, something religious authorities would prefer to keep away from prying eyes. After all, what kind of impact would this have on a people's faith, knowing that angels were not just divine messengers, but that they had passions, desires, and even rebelled against God? That, my friends, is the kind of forbidden knowledge that could turn the world upside down. There are those who say that the Book of Enoch contained esoteric knowledge that the church preferred to keep hidden, something that went beyond what the masses could understand or accept. Knowledge that could offer a totally different perspective on the role of angels and their relationship with humanity. And here, things get even more interesting. Amidst the theories, stories emerge of secret societies that would have access to these secrets. What, after all, could have been so dangerous? Perhaps a knowledge that challenged the notion of an unbreakable celestial hierarchy. Perhaps details about how these fallen angels would have passed on forbidden knowledge, something that has been pursued and hidden over the centuries, but which, for those willing to look, has always left traces. Conspiracy theorists love to connect the Book of Enoch to secret societies like the Templars, or even modern groups like the Illuminati. According to these theories, these groups would have kept knowledge hidden from the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the cosmic secrets that the church tried to suppress. For many, the exclusion of the Book of Enoch was a strategic move. It was easier to erase the clues than to explain to the public that the spiritual world was much more complex than it seemed. Why admit the existence of hybrid beings that walked the earth, or that heaven itself had its flaws, when one could simply omit the book and keep everyone under control? The conspiracies only grew stronger as the book was rediscovered and studied over the centuries. And of course, the more you try to hide something, the more fascinating it becomes. Many believe that the Book of Enoch holds secrets about the true nature of celestial beings and about events that changed the course of human history. Perhaps this is exactly why it was suppressed. Imagine the impact of revealing that beings who were considered celestial guardians could have mixed with humanity, generating descendants and sharing secrets that humans should never know. This challenges the entire narrative of celestial purity and, as a bonus, suggests that divine power was not so absolute after all. The fear of a theological collapse of a people who question the foundations of faith may have led to the censorship of this excluded and censored knowledge. In the end, the Book of Enoch represents a puzzle that the church chose not to resolve publicly. Instead, it has been relegated underground, circulating among those who have always sought a little more forbidden knowledge, a little more of that which is hidden. The attempt to keep Enoch hidden only gave further fuel to conspiracy theories involving secret societies, fallen angels, and secrets that could shake religious structures. And that's why, to this day, it remains a source of fascination. The Book of Enoch, with its Watchers and Nephilim, represents a point of intersection between the sacred and the occult, a threshold where untold truths and heavenly secrets meet. But if all this was so dangerous, what about the apocalyptic visions that the book brings? And what does this tell us about the era in which we live? The Book of Enoch presents a vision of the apocalypse that is, to say the least, disturbing. Unlike the idea of a grand, hopeful conclusion that most biblical interpretations offer, Enoch's apocalyptic visions seem more like a revelation of inevitable destruction, without much prospect of redemption. Now imagine yourself in the position of the first religious leaders, trying to convey the message of a loving and merciful God. How can we fit in an apocalypse that looks more like a horror movie, full of fallen angels, condemnation, and punishment? It was necessary to create a narrative that brought hope, that convinced people that, in the end, everything would be fine. And the Book of Enoch, with its devastating visions and prophecy of inexorable judgment, simply did not fit into this idealized scenario. It is no surprise that in modern times, the Book of Enoch has found new followers, especially among those who believe that we are living in the times described in its apocalyptic visions. There seems to be a kind of morbid fascination with doomsday predictions, and Enoch offers just that, a detailed portrait of the chaos, the intervention of the watchers, and the punishment of the wicked. This resonates with many contemporary movements, which see signs of the end times in global events, from climate change to wars and pandemics. It's as if the book brings confirmation that, yes, things are out of control, and there is something much bigger happening behind the scenes. For many, these apocalyptic visions of Enoch are a window into understanding what is happening in the world right now. It is a type of forbidden knowledge, excluded from the scriptures, but which seems to be echoing in newspaper headlines. Enoch's vision of fallen angels mixing with humanity and creating chaos is, for some, a metaphor that applies perfectly to our times. Perhaps these fallen angels are today the forces that corrupt our institutions, our environment, and our very essence. Enoch's visions of the apocalypse, which were considered incompatible with Christian hope, are gaining strength as the world increasingly appears to be heading toward chaos. But was the church right to marginalize this apocalyptic vision, perhaps at a time when it was crucial to build faith in a just and benevolent God? These images of destruction and punishment were simply too great a risk. Imagine a new convert, someone who has just found hope in faith, being faced with such a dark and detailed prophecy. It was not the type of message that encouraged adherence and staying on the path of faith. Thus, Enoch was purposely marginalized, kept out of the official narrative, so that faith could flourish without the weight of constant fear of the apocalypse. The decision was therefore both theological and strategic, an attempt to maintain the balance between the divine and the human. Still, the Book of Enoch has not disappeared, and its visions continue to disturb and intrigue. If it weren't important, it wouldn't continue to be debated. It seems there is something about human nature that is attracted to the forbidden, the excluded. Perhaps, therefore, Enoch's apocalyptic visions continue to find an echo in our days, especially in times of crisis. The idea that we are living in the end times described by the book is comforting, in a way, as it offers an explanation for the chaos around us. But if we are truly living out these visions, what does this mean for our future? And what about the criteria that were used to form the biblical canon, which decided the fate of Enoch and so many other texts? Let's now explore the debate over canonicity and how it has shaped what we consider sacred. What makes a book holy? Who decides what deserves or does not deserve to be included in a canon that will define the faith of millions of people? The formation of the biblical canon was not as simple or divinely ordained a process as many would like to believe. There was, indeed, a profound debate, often marked by political, cultural, and theological tensions. In the case of the Book of Enoch, the criteria that led to its exclusion varied according to traditions. While Western churches, such as the Roman Catholic Church, decided that Enoch should not appear among the sacred texts, other traditions, such as the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, maintained the book as an essential part of their teachings. And this leads us to question, is canonicity a matter of politics more than of faith? The differences in the criteria for the formation of the biblical canon were more profound than one imagines. Among Jews, the formation of the Tanakh had its own set of rules, while Orthodox and Western Christians followed divergent paths. What was considered inspired by God in one place was dismissed as dangerous or unnecessary in another. Enoch, in particular, seemed to have characteristics that did not suit the tastes of the Roman bishops. He talked too much about rebellious celestial beings, forbidden secrets, and esoteric knowledge that somehow challenged the narrative of divine order. Perhaps Enoch was an uncomfortable reminder that the cosmos was a much more chaotic and unpredictable place than the church would like to admit. One of the most interesting arguments in the canonicity debate was the question of coherence. For many church leaders, it was essential that sacred texts not only complement each other, but also not create ambiguities that could generate confusion among the faithful. Enoch, with its stories of angels who sin, share forbidden knowledge, and produce hybrid offspring, offered a vision of heaven and earth that was far from consistent with the idea of an all-powerful God and a perfect creation. It was much easier to discard the text and keep the official narrative in a straight, clear line. And that's exactly what happened. The leaders decided that for the sake of faith, Enoch should remain on the sidelines as an excluded knowledge, kept away from the eyes of the people. Still, it is intriguing to realize that despite its deletion, the Book of Enoch never completely disappeared. It has been preserved in traditions such as that of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which recognize its importance and maintain it as part of the canon. This raises an interesting question about the arbitrariness of decisions that define what is sacred. If a group of religious leaders decides to delete a text, does that mean it loses its spiritual value? Or is this exclusion actually a reflection of the human interests that have shaped the history of Christianity? Perhaps the decision to leave Enoch out of the Western canon was more about maintaining control than revealing divine truth. And it is precisely at this point that the debate over canonicity becomes fascinating. The exclusion of the Book of Enoch not only shaped the way we view the Bible today, but it also left gaps, empty spaces that were filled by theories, questions, and incessant curiosity. The fact that such a powerful and insightful book was left aside only reinforces the idea that forbidden knowledge is often more interesting than that which is openly accepted. And so, the Book of Enoch stands as a reminder that, in the history of faith, much of what is sacred was decided by human hands, guided by interests that were not always divine. And now, this brings us to another discussion. How do the Nephilim, these half-human, half-celestial creatures, fit into all of this? Were they myth, metaphor, or real history? Let's find out. The Nephilim are, without a doubt, one of the most mysterious and intriguing parts of the Book of Enoch. These hybrid beings, half human and half celestial, are described as descendants of the Watchers, the angels who, against all celestial rules, fell in love with human women. But who were the Nephilim really? Were they just a metaphor for the corruption of the ancient world, or something much more literal? For many, the narrative of the Nephilim is a powerful metaphor for how forbidden knowledge and the mixing of the sacred and the profane can lead to decay. But others see in them evidence of a history that has been intentionally forgotten, perhaps to hide an uncomfortable truth about human history. There are also those who believe that the Nephilim were not merely a mythological invention, but that they could be real descriptions of beings that existed at some point in human history. And this is where modern theories about ancient civilizations and even extraterrestrials come into play. Some suggest that the Nephilim could actually be visitors from other worlds, whose knowledge and capabilities were so advanced that they were interpreted as divine or semi-divine beings by the ancients. Could it be possible that the fallen angels were actually beings from another planet, and that the forbidden knowledge they brought was advanced technology that humans did not yet understand? It seems like an idea taken straight from a science fiction novel, but there are those who believe that ancient sacred texts are full of references to these encounters. On the other hand, the narrative of the Nephilim also resonates with mythologies from different cultures around the world. Almost every ancient civilization has stories about giants or hybrid beings who walked among humans, beings who challenged the status quo and often brought chaos. From the titans of Greek mythology to accounts of giants in Native American cultures, the idea of powerful beings who have fallen from grace seems to be a recurring theme. Could the Book of Enoch be telling a version of a story that was somehow shared between cultures separated by continents and oceans? Are the Nephilim a collective memory of a time when the world was inhabited by different beings, excluded from the official narratives of history? And here comes the question of modern science. With advances in archaeology and genetics, many wonder if we could one day find tangible evidence of the existence of the Nephilim. There are those who speculate that some archaeological discoveries, skeletons of extraordinary sizes and ancient structures that defy our understanding of engineering, may be related to these beings mentioned in Enoch. Of course, official science tends to dismiss such claims as mere coincidences or exaggerations, but the fascination remains. After all, if something like the Nephilim really existed, it would mean that the history of humanity is much more complex than we imagine, and that there was a time when forbidden knowledge, persecuted and censored, shaped the destiny of our species. In this case, the Nephilim are a kind of symbol, a reminder that there is much more between heaven and earth than our vain philosophy can explain. They represent the intersection between myth and reality, between the sacred and the profane, between human curiosity and fear of the unknown. Whether they were real beings or just a powerful metaphor, we may never know for sure. But the fact that his story was censored and excluded from the canon leads us to question, what else is hidden from us? What else was kept hidden to protect an official narrative? And speaking of occultation, what can we learn from the rediscovery of fragments of the Book of Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Let's explore this next. The rediscovery of fragments of the Book of Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the mid-20th century brought to light a wave of questions and debates about the history and formation of the scriptures. Imagine the impact of finding texts that had been all but forgotten for centuries, preserved in the desert like an echo of a distant time. Among the many writings discovered were portions of the Book of Enoch, which raised the inevitable question, why, even after this discovery, was it not reconsidered as part of the biblical canon? Could it be that the same forces that excluded it initially were still at work, fearing the hidden knowledge it contained? It seems that, even in modern times, certain knowledge continues to be considered too dangerous. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered by Bedouins at Qumran, revealed a wealth of information that revolutionized the way we understand ancient texts. The fragments of Enoch found among them brought a kind of historical legitimization to the book. After all, it was not a medieval invention or a rootless apocryphal text. It was there, preserved alongside other writings that are an essential part of the Old Testament. This leads us to question whether the exclusion of the Book of Enoch from the canon was really a theological judgment, or whether it was, in fact, a political and cultural decision to maintain the order desired by the religious leaders of the time. Was it possible that the censored and persecuted knowledge he brought was still a threat, even after so many centuries? Archaeology played a fundamental role in reopening debates that, for a long time, were considered closed. The mere fact that the Book of Enoch was found at Qumran, among other texts considered sacred, suggests that it had significant importance for the Jewish communities of that time. Perhaps for the Essenes who inhabited those caves, Enoch was a crucial piece of the puzzle of faith. And this raises an intriguing question. If they considered the book worthy of preservation, why did later tradition decide to discard it? Perhaps the content was simply too bold, full of apocalyptic visions and forbidden knowledge that, for the leaders, was safer to keep out of the hands of the common people. Even today, the impact of the rediscovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls continues to resonate. For many scholars, the Book of Enoch represents a bridge between Second Temple Judaism and early Christianity. It offers perspective on how the ancients viewed the world, their concerns about the fate of humanity, and their ideas about celestial beings. It is interesting to note how a text that was deliberately excluded from the canon still has so much to say about our spiritual history and about the fears and hopes that shaped the faith of our ancestors. Perhaps the problem is not the content of the book, but the freedom it gives the reader to imagine a cosmos much more complex and full of mysteries than the official narrative wants to admit. Thus, the rediscovery of the Enoch fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls was not just an archaeological revelation. It was a reminder that hidden and forbidden knowledge always finds a way back to the light. No matter how much we try to hide or censor, there is something inherent in the human spirit that searches for those forgotten truths. for those secrets that seem to call to us from time immemorial. The Book of Enoch, even outside the canon, continues to instigate, challenge, and invite those who have the courage to look beyond the surface. And now that we've walked this journey of rediscovery, we can only ask ourselves, what else is in the shadows of our history, waiting to be found? Perhaps the answer lies precisely in the gaps that remain to be filled. And if you long for more knowledge and the history that was forgotten, be sure to subscribe and click on the video that appears on the screen. Thank you very much, and see you next time.